Okay, let's take a look at Genesis 14 for another story about Abraham. This is a story in which Abraham really shines. You see, on the one hand, how much God favored him, blessed him, compared to all the other nations and all the other people around. And you see, on the other hand, how he responded in faith and in trust, relying only on God when he could have found somebody else to rely on. So let's take a look. Genesis 14. You also get a fascinating picture of Christ in this passage. Now, there's a ton of names here. I did the best I could to look them up and see how they're pronounced, but I'm sure I'll still get some of them wrong. But you'll be able to follow what's going on, even if I say the names wrong. It came about in the days of Amraphel, king of Shinar, Arioch, the king of Elasar, Kedor, this is the one I can never say, and he's really important. He's the most important. Kedor Laomer, apparently, king of Elam, and Tidal, king of Goyim. So there's 4 kings from the north, very powerful kings, it seems like, that they made war with Bera, king of Sodom, and with Bersha, king of Gomorrah. So Sodom, Gomorrah on the other side in the south. And Shinab, king of Admah, and Shem-Eber, king of Zeboim, and the king of Bela, that is Zoar. All these came as allies to the valley of Siddim, that is the Salt Sea. 12 years they had served Kedorlaomer, but the 13th year they rebelled. So the kings of the north had already been in charge, had conquered them, and in the 13th year they rebelled, and that's when this starts. Because in the 14th year, then that northern king and all the kings that were with him came and defeated, and it lists a whole bunch of defeats. They wound their way down the map, basically defeating one area after another. The Rephaim and Ashtaroth Karnaim and the Tzutzim and Ham and the Emim and Shaveh, Kiriathaim, and the Horites in their Mount Zair, as far as El Paran, which is by the wilderness. Then they turned back and came to En Mishpat, that is Kadesh, and conquered all the country of the Amalekites and also the Amorites who lived in Hazazon Tamar. And so we'll look at that in a minute. I'll show you a map. And the king of Sodom and the king of Gomorrah and the king of Admah and the king of Zeboim and the king of Bela, that is Zoar, came out. And they arrayed for battle against them in the valley of Siddim, against Kedorlaomer, king of Elam, and Tidal, king of Goyim, and Amraphel, king of Shinar, and Arioch, king of Elasar. 4 kings against 5. All right, so here's the picture. Up at the top on the right over here, you can see the 4 kingdoms coming together, they come all the way down, conquer some people here, it mentions, and then it conquers some people down here, come all the way down here, and then they turned around and came up here and started conquering all this area as well. And down here's where Sodom and Gomorrah are. But all these 5 kings from the south gathered together to try to defend themselves and to attack back. And so let's go on with the story. It says, now the valley of Siddim was full of tar pits. So the place that this valley took place was full of tar pits. And the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah fled. It didn't go well. They weren't able to defend themselves against these 4 kings from the north. And they fell into them. So when they fled, the fact that there were tar pits all over made it a hazardous place to be running from. But those who survived fled to the hill country. That's they hid out in the hills. Then the they here is the 4 kings that were conquering. They took all the goods of Sodom and Gomorrah and all their food supply and departed and headed back north. They also took Lot, Abram's nephew, and his possessions and departed, for he was living in Sodom. Okay. Then a fugitive came and told Abram the Hebrew. Now he was living by the oaks of Mamre the Amorite, brother of Eshcol and brother of Ener. And these were allies with Abram. When Abram heard that his relative had been taken captive, Lot, he led out his trained men born in his house 318 and went in pursuit as far as Dan. Now, when he led out his 318 men, they had been born in his own house, but I'm assuming Mamre and Eshcol and Aner also had men with them, because it does say later on they were allies together in this. He divided his forces against them by night. They were pretty much outnumbered, but he basically attacked at night stealthily so that they would be able to get away with that. He and his servants and defeated them and pursued them as far as Hobah, which is north of Damascus. He brought back all the goods and also brought back his relative Lot with his possessions and also the women and the people. So here's the map again. Abram starts right about here. That's where Jerusalem is, and he's in Hebron, which is nearby. And you can see the red line here. He pursues them northwards all the way up to here and even farther off the map. So he goes quite a distance here, waging this war and taking back what they took. Okay. Then after his return from the defeat of Kedorlaomer and the kings who were with him, The king of Sodom went out to meet him in the valley of Shaveh. That is the king's valley. So Sodom's king comes out because he's very grateful. He said, you rescued us and you rescued all our goods. And Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought out bread and wine. Now, Salem is where Jerusalem was, and so that's nearby also. And we've never heard of Melchizedek before. He just gets mentioned here. We'll talk about him a lot more later in this teaching. He was a priest of God Most High. He blessed him and said, blessed be Abram of God Most High, possessor of heaven and earth, and blessed be God Most High, who's delivered your enemies into your hand. He gave him a tenth of all. We'll talk about this later. But when it says God Most High, it apparently is talking about the real God, the Jehovah. And Abram says in the next section, you'll see he talks about that he serves the Lord God Most High. So I don't know how Melchizedek knew this God, but he apparently knew the real God and was speaking for him and prophesying over and speaking kind of a blessing over Abram and saying it's because of God and it's that he's delivered, and blessed be Abram and blessed be God. And when it says he gave him a tenth of all, the first he means Abram, and him means Melchizedek. Abram took a tenth of the spoils that he had just gotten as he conquered things, and he gave it as a tithe to Melchizedek. So this is a really important thing we're to come back to. And then the king of Sodom comes back into the picture. He said to Abram, give the people to me, take the goods for yourself. So he says, I'd like my people back, but you can keep all the goods. Abram said to the king of Sodom, I have sworn to the Lord God Most High, possessor of heaven and earth, that I will not take a thread or a sandal thong or anything that is yours, for fear you would say, I have made Abram rich. He says, I want it to be clear that only God has done this. I will take nothing except what the young men have eaten, the expenses essentially, and the share of the men who went with me, Aner, Eshcol, and Mamre. Let them take their share. He says, I'm not going to speak for my allies. They can take their share from you, but I personally am not taking anything from you. This is really fascinating. Okay, so let's talk about the example of Abram. First of all, we see Abram only comes into the story about halfway through. And he comes into the story because Lot has been taken, and he cares about Lot. So the first thing we need to talk about is not the example of Abram, but the example of Lot and of Sodom, just very briefly. We'd said before in chapter 13, it said that Abram settled in the land of Canaan, while Lot settled in the cities of the valley and moved his tents as far as Sodom. But by the time we get here, it says they took his possessions and departed, for he was living in Sodom. They had to clarify that because last time they left him perhaps outside of Sodom, just living in tents nearby. But by the time he gets to here, either Sodom has expanded to include him or he's just become a part of the city. So Lot has now become a part of the city. And remember, the men of Sodom were wicked exceedingly. And he's now part of this wicked country. The wicked city. The second thing I want to point out is, it's interesting, Sodom and Gomorrah will be judged harshly by the Lord in a couple more chapters. But in a way, they were being judged here. They got out of that judgment because Abram rescued them to rescue Lot. And so God blessed them because of the blessing he was giving to Abram. So they only got spared here because God was taking special care of Abram and making sure he was okay and he could survive the battle and he could bring Lot back. So they're sort of living by the grace and the mercy of God more than they know already. We'll see that later. But here, I want to focus on Abram. Okay, a fugitive came and told Abram the Hebrew. The thing I want to notice here, hold on just a minute, let me get my notes. Just a second. I want you to note how strong Abram is already. He had 318 trained men born in his house. Now, there's also women and children and men who probably weren't trained in battle, and they were part of his household also. And this is just Abram. He also has these three allies who work with him. So he's a very strong fellow living in this country. So God has already blessed him very much, and you can see that. And notice how much a blessing Abraham is to his allies, how much he's a blessing is even to Sodom and Gomorrah and to the 5 kings who lost this battle. They would be in big trouble here if it weren't for Abram and how he delivers them. So this is interesting. From going to where Abram was sort of unsure what he was doing and whether he has a place to live, he's now one of the most powerful men around. And when he acts and God blesses, the people he's acting on behalf of are blessed because of the way God blesses him. This is the fulfillment in many ways, not the only fulfillment, but the first fulfillment in many ways of what is said later and what it was hinted at before, that God will bless Abram so that in him all the nations will be blessed. You can see it happening just a little bit here. It's good to be on Abram's side because God is on Abram's side. Okay, And then we have this. After his return from the defeat of these kings, the king of Sodom went out to meet him, and we'll pick that up in a minute. But I want to start with this. Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought out bread and wine. Now he was a priest of God Most High. He blessed him and said, "Blessed be Abram of God Most High, possessor of heaven and earth, and blessed be God Most High, who's delivered your enemies into your hand." I want to start by just emphasizing what I did before. In a minute, we're going to look and see that this points to Christ. But right now, pretend you're reading this just as if you only had the Old Testament and hadn't yet seen what the New Testament writes about this. All you'd know is that Melchizedek was the king of Salem, that's Jerusalem essentially, that he brought out bread and wine, and he was a priest of the real God, and that he blessed Abram and said, "Blessed be Abram, and blessed be God Most High, who's delivered enemies into Abram's hand." And so the important thing here that you would notice was that this is one more sign, one more mark of the fact that God is saying to Abram, "I am blessing you. I am favoring you. I am on your side here. You can trust me. You can rely on me. You can look to me." And he's saying it even to everybody. He's saying to all the nations around as this man comes out, he's publicly saying, "Notice, Abram is my chosen person. And notice that I'm the God who brings victory. And look at him and learn about me. Look at him and be humbled before me." The second thing I want to emphasize, which I mentioned before, is that Abram gave a tithe to Melchizedek, which is interesting because Melchizedek is all he's doing is just blessing Abram. But Abram is, I think, giving a tithe as an act of worship, as an act of respect, not just for Melchizedek, but for the God he represents. He's responding to God's additional affirmation, additional confirmation by saying, "Yes, God is I respect and honor you, God, and I worship you, and I'm going to give respect to the priest you sent to me because he represents you." And he gave him a tithe. Now, all this will take on more significance in a minute when we look at it in terms of how it points to Christ. But for now, even without that, it's an amazing picture of how Abram is responding to, it's an amazing picture of the fact that Abram's success here comes from God. Abram's success here is because God is blessing him. And Abram recognizes that and gives a tithe to Melchizedek. And then my favorite part of this, as far as Abram's concerned, is the last part, where the king of Sodom says, "Look, you give the people to me, but you can keep all the goods you just captured back for us." And Abram says, "I've sworn to the Lord God Most High, possessor of heaven and earth, that I won't take anything from you, because I don't want you to be able to say I've made Abram rich." Now, he does let the other people, his allies, take stuff. And he says, "I'll take for what we've eaten," because that was sort of our expenses. But he says, "I'm not going to take anything else." Now, he didn't have to do this. There was no rule or law that said he wasn't allowed to take something from this. But he had sworn to the Lord that this is what he would do, that he wouldn't take this wealth. I don't know whether he did this just as he set out on the battle. Maybe he prayed and said, "God, I'm going to go pursue these people. We're really outnumbered. I ask you to bless, and I won't take any of the plunder. I just want to deliver a lot." Or maybe he did it sometime earlier. But the point is, he wants to follow through on it because it's a sign of his worship of God, and particularly of his trust in God. He's saying, "God, he's beginning to believe him now. He's saying, "I know that you're the one who's blessing me, and you possess all heaven and earth, and you've already promised all that I need. I don't need to take things from Sodom because I just don't even need it. All I need is what you have for me." And I love this act of faith by Abram, that he's like, "I'm not even going to take what the world is offering me because I only want what you're offering me." So Abram is a blessing to Sodom, but Sodom is not a blessing to Abram, and Abram doesn't even want it. He's like, "I'll bring my goodness to the world, but I don't want the world trying to give me its goodness because I trust in you and you alone." This is a great picture of faith for us as well, that we need to have our focus on what God will do for us and how God blesses us. And we become a blessing to everybody else, but we don't expect them to be the source of blessing for us. We look to God himself. Second, let's talk about the story of Israel. Once again, Israel is pictured in what happens to Abraham. So I'm not going to say a lot about this, but the idea is that this story shows the ideal relationship Israel could have had with the other nations if they had been walking more closely with God. This is the picture of what could have been, that they could have been the ones who were blessing the other nations. They could have had the favor and the strength and success that Abraham had here, and that would have come from following Jehovah. They could have been a blessing to all those who were their allies and all those who were depending on them. And they could have at the same time not taken the blessing from the world, but just looked to God alone. And notice also the contrast here with Sodom, which is very wicked. And this shows the distinction. Even as Israel read this, they would have seen the clear picture of the distinction between them as God's chosen people and the world as all the wicked nations around. They would have seen this replayed again with Egypt and with Assyria and with Babylon and with the Philistines, that they weren't here to get blessing from those people. They were here to get blessing from God. And then when those people were on their side, they would be blessed also. And those people were against them, they would be in trouble also. And so their judgment, notice again how the judgment of Sodom and Gomorrah was kind of held off for now. They were going to be judged later, but for now, it's kind of held off because of Abram. Later I'll just say it that way. This is all a picture of the way that God takes his chosen people, puts them in the middle of a world of nations which are against him, and then uses how he deals with his chosen people, how he blesses them, how he favors them, to show his glory and to show his reality to the rest of the world. And this is kind of a cool picture of that. But my favorite thing, and the most complicated, is the thing about the encounter with Christ, which is the story of Melchizedek. Said this, Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought out bread and wine. Now he was a priest of God Most High. He blessed him and said, "Blessed be Abram of God Most High, possessor of heaven and earth, and blessed be God Most High, who's delivered your enemies into your hand. He gave him a tenth of all." Now the thing is, some people think this was Christ in human form. Or at the very least, and this is how I'm going to take it, it's very much a picture of Christ. And we know that because of a couple of other verses. In Psalms, it first of all picks this picture up and then points out to extra meaning in it. And then in Hebrews, we get a long explanation of how all this fits. So let me go to the Psalms first and then to Hebrews. Here's the Psalm. Psalm 110. It starts with this. The Lord says to my Lord, "Sit at my right hand until I make your enemies a footstool for your feet." The Lord will stretch forth your strong scepter from Zion, saying, "Rule in the midst of your enemies." Your people will volunteer freely in the day of your power. In holy array from the womb of the dawn, your youth are to you as the dew. The beginning of Psalm 110 is a messianic psalm. The Lord means God, said to my Lord means the Messiah. God is saying to the Messiah, sit at my right hand, I'm going to bring you victory. I'm going to bring you rule. You're going to be in charge of the nation. And then he says in the very next verse, the Lord has sworn and will not change his mind. You, Messiah, are a priest forever, according to the order of Melchizedek. Now that's so strange because they've had priests according to the order of Levi, but all of a sudden this says according to the order of Melchizedek. Where does that come from? And then he goes on to talk again about his victory, his power as king. The Lord is at your right hand. He will shatter kings in the day of his wrath. He will judge among the nations. He will fill them with corpses. He will shatter the chief men over a broad country. He will drink from a brook by the wayside. Therefore, he will lift up his head. So the context of this psalm, all about the victory and the power of the Messiah king of Israel who's to come. We have this phrase that the Lord has sworn and will not change his mind. You are a priest forever, according to the order of Melchizedek. And this is weird because they didn't expect the Messiah to be a priest. And secondly, it says the order of Melchizedek, not the order of Levi. What in the world? Why would he be a priest after the order of Melchizedek? What would that mean? So Hebrews explains this. It says this. In Hebrews 5 first, it says, for every high priest taken from among men is appointed on behalf of men in things pertaining to God. That's what a priest does. He's there on behalf of the men, but he's there for things that are spiritually related, things that are pertaining to God, in order to offer both gifts and sacrifices for sins. And then it says, no one takes the honor to himself. You don't just get to declare yourself as a priest. Those who tried to do that in the Old Testament got in big trouble. But he receives it when he's called by God, even as Aaron was. And then we get the Levites from Aaron. So also Christ did not glorify himself so as to become high priest, but he, the Father, who said to him, you are my son, today I have begotten you. So it's showing that the Father called the Son to be high priest. And then says, just as he also says in another passage, and here's the passage from Psalm 110, you are a priest forever, according to the order of Melchizedek. So Christ was called to be honored as a priest by the Father himself. And then he goes on. He says, having been made perfect through his death and resurrection. He was already perfect in terms of his own character. It means having been made complete in terms of his role as the Messiah. He became to all those who obey him the source of eternal salvation, having been designated by God, or being designated by God as a high priest according to the order of Melchizedek. And a little bit later, he says in the next chapter, we have this hope, he means the hope that we can come before God and find grace, as an anchor of the soul, a hope both sure and steadfast, and one which enters within the veil. We get to go right into the presence of God, where Jesus has entered as a forerunner for us. Why? Having become a high priest forever, according to the order of Melchizedek. And finally, in chapter 7, he begins to explain why it's the order of Melchizedek. He says, for this Melchizedek, king of Salem, priest of the Most High God, who met Abraham as he was returning from the slaughter of the kings and blessed him, to whom also Abraham apportioned a tenth part of all the spoils, was first of all, by the translation of his name, king of righteousness. He says the Hebrew for Melchizedek means king of righteousness. And then also king of Salem, which it says in the passage he's king of Salem. Well, he says Salem is like shalom. It means peace. So he's king of righteousness and king of peace. Without father, without mother, without genealogy. He says when he's mentioned in the scriptures in Genesis 14, it doesn't tell you who his father and mother were, which it nearly always did with anybody, right? It always said this is the son of this person or of that person. It didn't tell you his genealogy at all, having neither beginning of days nor end of life, but made like the Son of God, he remains a priest perpetually. Now, this could mean that Melchizedek himself is immortal, in which case he was Jesus there, or it could mean that because he doesn't have any father or mother without genealogy, in the text that's there, it doesn't tell you where his days began. It doesn't tell you whether his life ends. He just shows up as this figure with no beginning and no end. So he's made like the Son of God in that story. The Son of God truly has no beginning and no end. Melchizedek is like that, and in that he's just given this role and given no beginning and no ending and just remains a priest in the story. And then it says, now observe how great this man was to whom Abraham the patriarch gave a tenth of the choicest spoils. He says, think about how great Melchizedek must have been. And because Abraham tithed to him. Abraham gave him honor. And those indeed of the sons of Levi who receive the priest's office have commandment of the law to collect a tenth from the people, that is, from their brethren, although these are descended from Abraham. But the one whose genealogy is not traced from them collected a tenth from Abraham, and blessed the one who had the promises. So it's saying the priests of the Levitical priests, the priest born from Aaron, took a tithe from the rest of the people of Abraham. But Abraham himself gave a tithe to Melchizedek long before that, and blessed the one who had the promises. So Melchizedek has kind of shown honor and priority by Abraham, and Levi comes from Abraham. He's the son of Abraham. So it's like if Abraham paid tithes to Melchizedek, it's kind of like Levi paid tithes to Melchizedek. So that's showing you which priesthood is more important. Then he says, without any dispute, the lesser is blessed by the greater. In this case, mortal men receive tithes. That's the people from Aaron and Levites. Those receive tithes as priests. But in that case, one receives them of whom it is witnessed that he lives on. And so to speak, through Abraham, even Levi, who received tithes, paid tithes, for he was still in the loins of his father when Melchizedek met him. When Melchizedek met Abraham, Levi didn't exist yet, but he was going to exist as one of the descendants of Abraham. And when Abraham paid tithes to Melchizedek, it's like Levi paying tithes to Melchizedek. And that's saying which one is more important. The lesser is blessed by the greater. And then it says, now if perfection was through the Levitical priesthood, for on the basis of it the people received the law, what further need was there for another priest to arise according to the order of Melchizedek, and not be designated according to the order of Aaron? Why would the Psalms say, I've made you a priest according to the order of Melchizedek, if Aaron's priesthood was good enough? Well, because Aaron's priesthood wasn't good enough, and the law wasn't sufficient to save. For when the priesthood is changed, of necessity there takes place a change of law also. We've moved away from the priesthood of Levi with the Mosaic law to the priesthood of Jesus with the law of grace that he represents. For the one concerning whom these things are spoken, Jesus, belongs to another tribe for which no one has officiated at the altar. It is evident that our Lord was descended from Judah, a tribe with reference to which Moses spoke nothing concerning priests. So clearly he isn't part of the Levitical priesthood. He isn't come just to reinforce the law. He's part of a completely new covenant. This is clearer still if another priest arises according to the likeness of Melchizedek. This new priest, Jesus, has become such not on the basis of law of physical requirement, who you're descended from, like Levi, but according to the power of an indestructible life. For it's attested of him, you're a priest forever, according to the order of Melchizedek. So just like Melchizedek is represented as having no father and mother, no genealogy, Jesus truly has no father or mother, no genealogy, because he lives forever. And he's going to be a priest forever, and his priesthood is a priesthood forever that never goes away. He never ceases to be an effective priest for us. Now, again, this could mean that Melchizedek is just a symbol of Jesus. It could actually mean Melchizedek was Jesus himself. I'll leave that up to you. But here's the summary. Abram is an example of faith in this chapter. God blessed him on the one hand, and then he refused to rely on anything else but only God himself. And this chapter depicts the kind of relationship Israel was intended to have with the other nations. And then in Melchizedek, we have a picture of Christ, perhaps Christ himself, and his perfect priesthood. So this is a complicated chapter, but kind of cool. I will see you next week.